But I don't want to take too much time. So this morning for our keynote address, we have Dr. Malia Villegas from the National Congress of American Indians Policy Research Center. Malia, and she has a more extensive bio in the book, so I'm not going to read it word for word. And she'll also introduce herself when she comes in. But Malia is going to share some insights about the role of tribal governance, of how research plays in improving community health, and to highlight tools designed to strengthen tribal academic research partnerships. I worked with Malia for about 2.5 years at CRCAIH, and we used to just have amazing discussions on a regular basis about tribal research ethics, community-based participatory research. We worked on a large study around that area, but we just constantly had really great brainstorming sessions, and it was really exciting. And so I want to welcome Malia up here to the podium. She's currently the director of the Policy Research Center in Washington, D.C. If you haven't had a chance to look at the resources that they also offer, please do. She's an enrolled member of the native village of Afognak in Alaska, where she also serves on her tribal council. Dr. Villegas is Shupiaq and Alutiiq, with family from Kodiak and Afognak Islands in Alaska, and Oahu and Lanai in Hawaii. She currently serves as the principal investigator for an NIH Native American Research Centers for Health project examining the use of dissemination of community-based participatory research practices in indigenous and minority communities. She also is the PI for an Administration of Native Americans project that's focused on youth, Native leadership and policy, and serves as a co-core director with the NIDDK project, the National Institutes of Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney project with the Washington University, looking at diabetes translation research. Dr. Villegas and I had the fortunate opportunity to travel out during that time period that I was there to 4 tribal communities in Montana and deliver their research curriculum, which was just a really tremendous experience. And so not only does she come from a great range of academic experience, but also really has that on the ground, in the community aspect to her experience as well. So I look forward to her, to the knowledge that she'll share with us today, and really the challenge that she'll provide to all of us in research. Welcome, Malia.
Chamai and Waka, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all, especially these young people. So wonderful to see the young energy. I'm so glad you're able to join us this morning. I am very honored to be here. It's my first time in South Dakota, and it is beautiful. I was reflecting a little bit on Facebook. I know it's a little old school for you youngins. How much it reminds me of when I go home to Alaska. Just the small plains and kind of seeing home communities in that way, and just the beauty of the land. I'm kicking myself that I didn't plan to stay over the weekend so I could see more of your community, but I hope to be back. So thank you for welcoming me here. I have had friends from this region many over the years, and so to be able to come and see a little bit of your home is just really wonderful. I am Alutiiq Shupiaq with family from the islands of Kodiak and Afognak in Alaska. We do our map of Alaska like on our hand. The island chains out this way, the southeast this way. I'm from down in the southwest part, and I always like to acknowledge our relationship. So you may have heard of the Inupiaq or Inuk people up in the northwest, the Yupiaq or Yuk people in the southwest, kind of the mud flats region, the river region, and then we're the Shupiaq or Shuk people. So you can hear Inuk, Yuk, and Shuk, our relationships in terms of how we call ourselves the real people, and acknowledging our relationships to our spirit and animal relatives out that way. I do serve on my council. I'm honored to do that. I've been appointed when one of our elders passed, and so I have to actually run for election in October, so that'll be a fun experience. But I was just on the call yesterday with the Navy about training activities that they want to do, some bombing relation to our islands. And so this work is very, very personal to me. We have these conversations on a daily basis. But I'm so grateful to Sanford and to our partners for inviting us to this space to have some of this conversation today. I want to share with you a little bit about NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians. How many of you in this room have heard of NCAI, know a little bit about NCAI? Okay. A few. All right, we've been around a little while, 1944. So we claim to be the oldest, largest, and most representative organization that works in the interests of tribal governments. Tribes can be members of NCAI as well as individual Indian people. You can be a member as well as our affiliate members that way. We serve sovereignty. That is our mission at its core. How do we uplift sovereignty and self-determination and create a space for Indian people to come together? When I applied for this job about 4 years ago, I've been there since October 2011, I researched a little bit about some of the executive directors and things that have been written about NCAI and its role, and I found a quote by someone who I think a few of you might know from this region, certainly Vine Deloria Jr., who was a former executive director of the National Congress of American Indians. And he said, if the NCAI doesn't serve as a forum for the Indian people, it has no purpose. And so that's really what our role is. A lot of people think we're largely a conference organization. We do have 3 conferences a year, which take a lot out of our staff, but we love it, to create a space for tribal leaders to come together and think collectively about what their work together is. How do you create a unified policy agenda in that way? And that certainly is our work. 10 years ago, tribal leaders came together and said, you know, policy is a critical part of what NCAI does, but in order to inform that policy, we need a research arm. We need to do better with data, and we need that information to inform the work that we're doing on the Hill in Washington, D.C. Emily may have mentioned we're at the Embassy of Tribal Nations. We do have embassy status in D.C. We don't get the fancy diplomat license plate, so I got to drive real careful in D.C. You know, can't get away with anything there. But we are on the State Department list, so when we have international visitors who want to learn about indigenous people in the U.S., we host those visits. So we've had visits from people from Peru, Kenya, Chile, all over the world, and it's kind of fun. You get to feel like you're at the UN with the little earpieces and the translators, and you have to kind of talk a little slower and listen very carefully, but it's a really neat kind of opportunity and space that way. And so when tribal leaders came together and said, we need a research arm, we need an organization, they created the space, the department that I run, the Policy Research Center. Sarah Hicks Kosteluk, who's now the director of the National Indian Child Welfare Association, was the founding director. I claim her as a second cousin. She's from our region in Kodiak Island, has roots in a Fognak as well, so there must be something in the water out there, eh? So she was the founding director. I've been there just under 4 years now. But our mission at the Policy Research Center is in 3 parts, really. It's to provide tribal leaders with the best knowledge and information to inform their decision-making within a framework of Native wisdom to ensure the best futures for our people. So information to inform their decision-making. We don't take a stance on topics. We provide information so that tribes can choose. That's sovereignty in action within a framework of Native wisdom. Culture matters, right? How can we leverage and engage our cultures in ways to think about research and policy to ensure the best futures for our people? This is the work. As part of our work in that domain, we assert that tribes have sovereignty over research that happens on their lands and with their citizens, even when those citizens are not on their lands. So those could be urban citizens. Whenever that tribe is engaged in the research process, the name, the categorization of it, there is sovereignty at work there. And so that's a big part of our mission on that front. A big part of my job in coming into NCAI was to create a vision for what that would mean in terms of the work that we would do at the Policy Research Center. Some of you who know our legislative work on Capitol Hill in D.C. may know that that work is organized by issue area. So we have legislative associates who are working on education, on health, on juvenile justice, on climate change, on any number of, I counted one time, 75 plus issue areas, anything having to do with nations building, water, things like breastfeeding, any number of things that policy could touch. You know, we have somebody who is actively working on that topic or helping to steward that. Our work in the PRC I've designed to be purposefully different. We're not organized by those issue areas. And so I used a metaphor. I'm from the islands, as you heard. So if you think about what a dorsal fin does for a mammal, you know, the fin on a whale or on a dolphin, that's kind of my vision for what the PRC can do for the mammal that is NCAI. Dorsal fin helps to keep a mammal balanced. That's part of our work in research. It helps to guide it through difficult waters when we have challenging situations, Violence Against Women Act. We were struggling to push through the narrative and the research. How can we help on that front? We help to identify NCI as a unique provider of particular information and advocacy. And we help to protect it from predators. So that's a big part of our work. But dorsal also helps me remember what our work is. It's an acronym. Just ignore the vowels. So DRSL is what we do. D is for data. I call ourselves the pointy heads of NCAI. We're the native nerds. I hope there's a few native nerds here in the audience. Represent, okay? We have always been scientists. This is our work, right? So I know there's some great science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and arts folks here. So STEAM represent that way. So our work is, what is the federal government collecting when it comes to data on American Indians, and what's the quality of that data? We've coined a term at NCAI called the asterisk nations. You know what an asterisk is? That star, right? It sounds like a good thing. It's not really a good thing. You go into any major federal study on education, on health, you get down to the racial and ethnic data. You go, okay, Hispanic, all right, Asian American, African American, okay, American Indian, got it. There's often a little star there, a little asterisk, right? You go down and you read the little footnote and it says too small to be measured, too small to be significant, right? We are small populations, and that becomes a challenge in scientific measurement because you need large numbers often for power. We are the asterisk nation. That contributes to the invisibility of our needs and our strengths in the larger conversation. And that's something we think we've got some of the best scientists across the world who can help us figure this out. So that's one of our big data advocacy pieces. The R of dorsal is research regulation, which you saw Dr. Amy present a bit about in their work here at CRCA, but it's also research stewardship. We have a curriculum that Emily mentioned to talk about how do we help support tribes exercise their sovereignty through research, to be in the driver's seat. And so we've adapted some of that curriculum into a toolkit that we're going to be piloting tomorrow. Some of you have opted to participate in this new pilot to think about concepts like culture, governance, and trust in a research conversation. How do we engage with those pieces effectively? The S of dorsal is synthesis, dissemination, and translation, which is just a fancy way of saying we don't do a whole lot of original research at NCAI, data collection and analysis, but we try to synthesize what you all are doing out there with your original research to then communicate it back to the communities so that they can use the information to better effect. We had a recent roundtable around the link between diabetes and oral care, teeth, and our oral health, and particularly in our youth, and trying to synthesize what IHS was saying, what the National Indian Health Board was saying, what researchers were saying, so that policy makers could do the right thing when it comes to a policy like the dental health aid therapy program. How do we build workforce in our communities to serve the dental and oral health care needs of our youth? And then the L of dorsal is leadership and network development. As a team, we've committed to working ourselves out of a job, succession planning, bringing forward these wonderful young people through fellowships and internships to be the next policy researchers. Anytime I have young people in the room, you know, we have some great lawyers in Indian country, we have some great engineers in Indian country, great doctors. We need demographers, we need statisticians, we need mathematicians, we need people who are data workers, health policy, health data workers, health statisticians. So we really need to kind of build along some of that piece there. So that's a little bit about our work at NCAI. I'm going to ask you to put a pin in some of that. I just wanted to introduce a little bit of that. I'm going to return to that. The core of what I really want to talk about is kind of this theme of stronger ethics, stronger research, and some of what we've learned in setting a course for where tribal research could go into the future. And I would like to invite you to engage with me on this. Everything we do is a work in progress, so this is a discussion. These are the things that I just want to put in front of you. About 2 weeks ago, I was in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is about a 25-hour journey. I was going from Anchorage, from some tribal meetings, down to New Zealand. New Zealand is across from Australia, other side of the world. I think I lost a day going there because it was the next day when I arrived, but then I gained it back. So time travel was a little fun, but exhausting. And I was there on a project, international advisory project, looking at how indigenous communities are thinking about whether they want to participate in genetics research and biobanking. So the collection of biological materials like blood, skin cells, samples, and how those materials should be cared for and used in research. We have a genetics resource center at NCI. Tribal leaders came to us and said, hey, we've got genetics researchers coming to us asking us to participate. What do we need to know? What should we ask them in having some of this conversation? And so we've been participating in this New Zealand conversation with partners from Canada, Indigenous people from Canada, Australia, and other parts of the world having these same discussions elsewhere. And as part of this project, we worked with 4 tribes. They call them iwis, IWI. So we went back to one of the local iwis and we're returning some of the data that they had shared with us about whether they would participate in genetics research. This is a community that has a number of families that has a degenerative brain disease that's passed down in the family. And they were so grateful that we would take the time, it was evening, and would return some of this data. We were, of course, were so happy that they had participated with us. But over the course of the conversation, we ended up talking about the fact that they were grateful for us returning it because of their experiences with their providers. There's one primary expert on this brain disease in New Zealand who is their doctor. And what they explained to us in this conversation was that they had learned some things that he had told them that weren't the latest science in some of their international conversations, and they wanted to push back on some of the medical advice and ask other questions to get better care for their children and their families in this conversation. But they were terrified that by pushing back and asking these questions, that this provider would get upset and would stop providing the best care for them, and that they would then not have access in their minds to a cure or to the best care for their children and families. About a week before I went on that trip, I myself went in for a standard medical appointment, a new doctor, and over the course of the 10-minute window that she gave me in that period of time, just had a very jarring experience, and her telling me things that I knew in my own work and health were not true, and scaring me, terrifying me, but me feeling powerless despite my master's in education, my PhD, my work here at a national level in health, to not be able to say to her, that's incorrect, and I have more questions on that, to be so terrified. And the reason I'm telling you these 2 stories is because I've been thinking a lot over the past couple of months about how fear characterizes our work in health and in research. And I think that this is a major challenge for us. And I want to issue a challenge back for us to consider that and to think if there's another way. I put that out there because I think that initially when I came to this work at NCI, I engaged it as an exercise in mitigating, preventing, and diminishing these fears. We've heard in every conversation, research can be a dirty word in our communities, right? And in almost every talk I've gone to on tribal research or indigenous research, especially on ethics, you will start, and the conversation will start by hearing the genealogy, the lineage of ethical violation, of harm, of things that have gone wrong. That genealogy and that history and that lineage is important. But in my mind, the question is, what do we do with that? Where do we go with that? If I tell you not to think about an elephant, what are you going to think about? An elephant, right? If we're constantly focused on fear, it's very difficult for us to move beyond that fear. And so I'm not convinced that this is our primary work anymore. I'm speaking for myself, but I'm putting it out there to you as a thought. The reason is because I think the opportunity to choose fear in our relationships and research or any of the work that we do is always here. It's always a choice. You can always choose to come from a place of fear. It's not going anywhere. But today I propose that our work may instead be to carve out another choice for research partnership and for the work that we do in health. If we think about the vision and the goal and the outcome that we have, which I believe collectively is wellness, joy, happiness for our communities, for our relatives. The choice that I'm going to suggest is radical. I want you to prepare yourselves, all right? My colleagues, when I tell them this, often will kind of giggle and laugh at me and go, I don't know, you're kind of getting a little fuzzy. Not sure we can go along with that. We got to be professional, you know. We got to do this work. And I think, you know, sometimes I'm a little crazy, but I think you can handle it. So I'm going to put it out there. The choice that I'm talking about, beyond fear, you ready? It's love. I want to put that out there today. Yeah, I said it. Love, love, love. Let me ask you though, when's the last time you went into a research meeting or read a research article or had a research conversation that include the word love? I challenged my policy partners in DC this year to start using words like love, hope, peace, and joy in their work in policy. And what kind of reaction do you think I got? Yeah, some giggles and yeah, whatever, Malia, yeah, you're crazy. I said, you know what? If we can use words like violence, oppression, trauma, and stress, why can't we use words like love, hope, peace, and joy? Right? Think about this. Think about what our work is. Think about what our vision for health and wellness is. So I got to turn the light back on me and my work, right? If I'm going to challenge my policy colleagues to do this, why can't we build from love in research? Okay, so Malia, what are you talking about? Where are we going with this? Tell us a little bit more before we go along with you. All right, well, let me break it down. Let's talk about relationships, right? When a new relationship is forming, personal relationship, professional relationship, what is required for that love to bloom and to blossom? Well, you got to get to know that person. You got to come to know who they are, where they come from, what they're about. But you also got to get to know yourself in that relationship a bit more, right? You got to reflect. Think about a research partnership. It's not just what that research partner is or isn't doing for you. It's who are you and how are you coming and how are you going to help contribute to that link in that relationship. In getting to know each other, you also have to assess whether your values align and whether you have similar hopes for the future. This is our work. Do we have a similar vision for what research can do going forward? Are we aligned in our values? And if not, maybe it's not the right research partnership, but maybe there's another partnership out there that could be. And another piece that I think is often missed in relationships that I'm having to learn in some of the hard ways about in many different contexts is this concept of committing to holding space for each other. We're, I said, piloting a curriculum tomorrow with our partners at the University of New Mexico. We've called it Holding Space because we think this concept is so powerful, and I encourage you to Google it. There's a great Facebook articles about holding space, but what it means for us is that I think a lot of times people expect that in relationships, there's not going to be conflict, right? It's going to be rainbows and puppy dogs and unicorns, and it's going to just feel good all the time. What I've come to learn, and slowly still am learning, is that in the best relationships, those are the ones that are going to trigger you. They're going to bring up pain, they're going to bring up fear in so many ways, but they're also going to hold you in that space so that you can work through that pain and that fear and grow together collectively, right? How do we as research partners think about how we hold space for each other, how we come to know each other and allow for mistakes, but move forward and try to name those and get better. Allow for the fact that we're going to have disagreements, we're going to have conflicts, but how do we hold that space for each other to move through some of those pieces in that way? So what I'm suggesting, what I've learned, is that relationships require vulnerability and trust, right? You have to kind of expose yourself if you're going to grow together in that space. It can't just be all about you. And they won't work if either partner is seeking power over the other one, or if there's a defensiveness, right? If you go into a relationship thinking, okay, there's got to be a winner and there's got to be a loser. If you're in relationship and you're the winner and your partner is the loser, guess what? You're still the loser because you're in relationship. So you have to shift the focus at some level to think about things like power with. How do we be collectively winning together in that space? And that's about that negotiation kind of concept there. So these are some of the things that I've been thinking a little bit about in this. And this is all not to say that tribal nations don't have reasons to choose fear in this, or that our academic partners don't have reasons to choose fear in entering into these research relationships, or to resist being vulnerable, right? There's trust issues we got to work through. There's histories and legacies. Fear is always here. It's always here going, choose me, choose fear, I'm here. Easy, easy, yep. Research relationships, there's always that choice to be defensive in this space. Love is not an easy choice. It is never the easy choice, but I believe it is the choice we must make if we are going to get to a different end in this work. Tribal nations, do have a reason. Academic partners do have a reason in this, and I'm going to, give you a little bit of a reason to be afraid here for a moment before returning to love. And that is, I told you it's not easy. There is an aggression at work. I'm going to say that again. There is an aggression at work and a climate of dominance present in research, right? This fear space. It's very real. I see it every day in DC. I often will say to my mom, since I got to DC, I'm such a conspiracy theorist, man. I think everybody's against us. And she's like, you're an Indian. You've always been a conspiracy theorist. This is just kind of bringing it out in you in that space. But it's real. There are interests at work. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of my impressions. You may have other thoughts on this. President Obama, who I think, has done amazing things for this country. One of his legacies, he wants to go down as the science president. I'm told by his staff, some of his closest staff, some of who you are related to in this room, that the annual science fair is one of his favorite activities every year, and he just really believes in the value of science and research. 2 years ago, April 2013, as he was launching his president's budget to Congress that goes as a recommendation, he had a convening that not many people paid attention to, but we did. It was a convening of all the heads of science organizations in this country. CRCAIH, which publishes the leading science journal called Science, and the National Science Foundation, NOAA, which is about oceans and atmospheric agencies, and NIH, National Institutes of Health, all of these, Department of Energy, all of these science organizations at the CRCAIH headquarters to talk about his research and development budget, R&D. And it amounted to 4% of the annual U.S. budget, which is massive. And a lot of people think, well, yeah, that's defense spending, right? That's science and research. We have to have a good defense. It was not, by and large, a lot of defense spending. Some of the priorities were related to emphasizing brain research. And this is an area that we think is important on a lot of fronts. We have elders who are aging and have some brain diseases. We have folks who have traumatic brain injuries due to unintentional injuries in our communities, and other needs. But there's a couple of concerns we have with this brain research. If you read some of the policy, it emerges from having to map the human genome. So there's genetics research. Now there's an effort to map the human brain, which sounds great, learning about the human brain, how it works. But there is some language in the policy that says we want to map the human brain so that we can modify human behavior. I'm going to say that again, modify human behavior. That scare anybody? Whose behavior does it often seem to be seen that needs to be modified first and most? Yeah, a lot of our relatives, right? So we get a little worried about that. And the other piece is, what does brain research need in order to go forward? Brains, right? I know. I'm just asking real simple questions here. So brain research, thinking about removal of an organ from a body after death, this culturally does not always fly with our relatives. Who's going to maintain stewardship of that piece? Is it going to be returned? How is it going to be cared for? These are questions around biobanking and genetics and that sort of brain research that we have to think about. BD2K kind of sounds like a Burger King combo to me. It's big data to knowledge, right? We've heard a little bit about that, building big data system. What's the benefit to our communities to participate in big data systems at this level? These are some of the conversations. The commodification of information. You should be concerned about the sale and the trade of your personal information. When we were trying to develop a native vote database to figure out who votes, where, do native people participate, which we found some fascinating things, the data that we were having to get access to was coming from your purchases, credit card purchases, and thinking about how that information is bought and sold. So there are these pieces that could bring benefit around personalized medicine, you know, around new tools that are out there, but what's the other side? How can we think about this? And who's in charge? Who's making decisions? My concern is, okay, you got a big R&D budget out there. Who's holding researchers and scientists accountable for the outcomes of their work and making sure that they have benefit back to our people? That's a big part of our job at NCI. We're a watchdog. Somebody asked me from Australia the other day, what sector are you guys in? I said, oh, nonprofit. She goes, no, like knowledge sector. And I said, well, we're kind of the accountability sector and capacity building. And she was like, okay. So, you know, and cybersecurity, putting your data in a cloud, right? We heard a lot about data management. My own corporation, the Afognet Native Corporation, was we experienced cyber fraud a month ago, 3.8 million stolen from a very sophisticated team in Hong Kong that included psychologists looking at our leadership profiles online, searching our Facebook to figure out when our leaders were going to be away from the main office out in the villages. I mean, it was unbelievable, you know, but we're advocating big data systems. We want to participate, but how do we protect ourselves in that kind of conversation? So I'm just sharing some of these here. I think the one that's, I know that this region was most engaged with our shop recently was about the genomic data sharing policy and the lack of tribal consultation on that front. Some of our federal partners met with us as NCAI. We were very clear, this does not constitute tribal consultation. We can help make connections for you with the tribes to consult, but that data sharing policy went forward without tribal consultation. So these are things that are happening on a day-to-day basis that we all should be concerned about. Fear, and that choice is always here. And yet, we'll return here, there is also, as we each know, a lot of pain and a deep need for healing and relief in our communities and ourselves, right? There's always this choice for fear. What is the impact that we want to have? There are researchers out there who are calling for a different way of doing things, who are talking about what we might call as the gold standard, randomized controlled trials, these approaches to research in health and medicine that may not actually be the best way of doing our business. I often will talk about the research center funded by Stanford University. I don't think I'm pronouncing his name right, but the way that I pronounce it is Dr. Ioannidis. He's a Greek researcher, I believe, and he at one point was called the most feared researcher in the US or in the world because he was taking some of these gold standard studies and replicating them, right? You're supposed to be able to replicate science, to do it again and get to the same or similar results. He was replicating some of these major studies and finding that the results that were held up as the gold standard were not replicable. And then he traced back some of the genealogy of who was funding some of these studies and found it was a lot of pharmaceutical companies and industry seeking to produce medicines that could be then purchased and financed. I'm not trying to frame all research at all as problematic, but that here's a researcher and others who are calling for a different approach, a different ethic to the way that we do our work. That I think parallels some of what I'm talking about. I also heard a talk recently that blew my mind a little bit by the head of the Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC. So this is an organization that helps support medical schools with their training of doctors, right? And he got up there and he said, we have historically funded strategic plans for medical schools to do better, to align their curriculum, to provide better training for their students. And we've stopped doing that because they go through this strategic planning discussion and then they produce this beautiful report and it goes on a shelf, right? And he said, what we've learned we have to invest in is something completely different from strategy. And he used a line that I try to use in every speech now, which is culture eats strategy for lunch. I'm going to say it again. Culture eats strategy for lunch. They have learned that their investment in institutional culture and how we come to learn, how we build processes is more valuable than a look at strategy in that way. So I'm putting these two examples up to you to say that there is a push and a call for a different way of doing our work. And we have to think collectively, I think, about what is that. So given that there is a lot of pain and a deep need for healing and relief in our communities and ourselves, and a belief that research can actually be a lever towards that healing, we have a choice then in our research and in how we approach this work. Fear, aggression, dominance, divide and conquer, this is a pervasive paradigm. You can read any policy and you can find it in there. I'm increasingly seeing policies of death. I'm seeing the characteristics here, and I'm scared of that. That fear is always there. How will we meet this aggression? How will we meet this fear? Will we choose to extend that fear? What outcomes do we want in our work? That's really what I want to put forward. And so in the last kind of third of my talk, I want to give you some examples of what we've tried to do to begin to choose love in our work and to not choose fear in this sense, to give you an example of what this might look like and to put some thought out there to this discussion that I'd love to have with you over the next day or so. And in thinking about this, so one of the things that we've found is it's critical for us as Indigenous people, as Native people, as Indian people, to tell our own stories. We have seen this no more clearly in the work that we've done with our Native youth. We've had some data summits with our Native youth, and what we've talked with them about, in part led by what was done here after the Diane Sawyer interview and feature, the youth responded out here to say, we are more than that, right? We are more than what you portrayed our communities to be. What we found in DC is that if our policymakers know anything about our kids, right, if they know anything beyond that asterisk, too small to be measured, they know one of four things: that our kids are overweight and have diabetes, that our kids have high rates of suicide, that our kids have high rates of dropout, and that our kids have high rates of substance abuse, right? We put those facts in front of our young people and we say, what do you think about that story? What do you think about that narrative? And every time they say, we're so much more than that. And we say, okay, help us tell your story to policymakers. What do you want policymakers to know about you as Native youth? And consistently, and we've had them design infographics, right, using data to tell visual stories that we can then put in front of policymakers, use on social media. Every single time we do this, the same response comes back. And it's, we want to tell the story about how culture and language matter to us in our daily lives. We had a beautiful infographic of a feather they designed, and it said, 10 out of 10 Native youth want to learn their native language. And then it was a little bit of a broken feather, and it said only 3 out of 10 are taking the steps to do so. And I said, wow, where'd you get your data? And they said, oh, we just took a little poll around the table. I said, okay, you got to start with where you're at, you know? But they were talking about their responsibility to choose culture and language in this work. And so I'm always amazed that when we begin to shift the conversation about telling our own stories, the stories that we tell are stories of strength, of culture, and what works best for us. I also saw this in New Zealand. I went over there to do my doctoral work, and my question was about their effort to graduate 500 Maori PhDs in 5 years, which they not only did, they superseded over there. They graduated about 723 Maori PhDs in 5 years' time. How did they do that? Why did they do that? Who were these people who were signing up to do PhD programs? By and large, they were middle-aged women, mothers and grandmothers who wanted to inspire their children and grandchildren to choose education and to pursue. But many of these folks were not choosing to be professors or academics. They were choosing to document their community stories in their places and to use research and the skills that they learned through their PhD to do that work, to tell their own story in that way. One other example, a Native Hawaiian colleague, Dr. Kekailoa Perry, wrote a beautiful article that you can find online about this concept of the crabs in the bucket. I don't know how many of you know about this idea of the crabs in the bucket. If you put one crab in the bucket, it will climb out, right? It'll get away. You got to put at least 2 crabs in the bucket, because when that first crab tries to start climbing away, the second crab will pull it down. And a lot of times you hear this metaphor of the crabs in the bucket in our communities in terms of people succeeding and then other community members pulling them down and not wanting success, right? Our choice around success. He chose love, and he reframed this metaphor. And he said, you know what? In Hawaii, we have this crab called the alamihi crab. And the traditional place for the crab is not in the bucket, first of all, right? That is not where we belong, these crabs. They belong on the land. And thinking about the place, if we all think about writing our relationship to our places, there will be enough room for all of us. There will be enough success for all of us. So that's an example of choosing to reframe a way of thinking how our communities think about our successes and coming at it from a different way and building that right relationship and choosing self-love. A second way that we've begun to try to choose love is to reframe the conversation about gap, right? Achievement gap. Health gap, disparities gap. We hear the gap in almost every policy conversation that we're in. We've tried to promote a series of comparisons that are different. Instead of comparing how our Native kids are doing to white kids or East Asian kids in school, how are our Native kids in Phoenix doing compared to our Native kids in Rapid City? How are they doing compared to our Native kids in Seattle, in Anchorage? Developing Native to Native comparisons allows us to think about, wow, Rapid City's doing some really great things on teacher retention that we're not doing in Seattle for our Native kids. What can we learn from one place to compare to the other? And I think that this CRCAIH has a real potential. Yesterday I heard the tribal partners tell really amazing stories about what they're doing in their individual tribes. For me, in my mind, the next step is for then, how do you leverage that across this powerful 3-state region? You know, these 23 tribes in the 3 states. You've got access to 14 that are interested in this. How do you begin to leverage your strengths, right? It pushes back on the scarcity paradigm that, God, I got to get mine. Otherwise, you're going to get mine, and then I'm not going to have enough, right? That's divide and conquer. That's choosing fear. In so many of our cultures, we know that it's not, that wealth and happiness and joy is not based on how much you keep. It's those who give the most away, those who care the most, put the most out there for others. How do we share collectively and build a paradigm of love in our research? Native to Native comparisons. Wow, we can do this with data? Absolutely we can do this with data. We can tell our own stories about what's working well in one context and share that information across. And that's a big part of our work at NCAI, is telling those success stories and showing them. It's not just one model, right? One size doesn't fit all. Sovereignty, right? Everybody gets a choice to do the way that works best for them, but we can showcase range and try to build relationships. A second related piece is doing our work in very place-based ways. Former Chairman Robert Shepard from this region, Sisseton Wapits and Oyate, challenged us at NCAI when he was on our board. He said, you know, when I go to meet with President Obama and 11 other tribal leaders every year, which President Obama has committed to and carried out, I need to not only know, Malia, what is going on in my region, but I need to know what's happening in the Northwest, in the Southeast, in the Northeast, so that we can get to a unified set of policy priorities that the President can then take forward and can action. So he challenged us to not just do our data work at a national level, but to push down and create regional kinds of data that is more place-based, that talks about the fact that you got strengths and resources in this region we don't have in Alaska, but we could learn from in that context. So we released a series of regional data profiles in October. I encourage you to take a look at our website. They're all on there. We have a Great Plains regional profile up there. Let us know if it's useful to you in your work. Let us know what other kinds of data you might know about that we can try to improve at that level. What we found by beginning to do these Native to Native comparisons and regional work, building from our strengths, is really happening. People are going, wow, they're doing that over there. Tulalip is now working with, I think, San Carlos Apache to do trauma-informed care around preschool. I mean, they're building communities of healing for their very youngest by sharing what's happening. But we also begin to shine the light not on what's broken about us, which is what policy has done consistently, but about what the systems are doing to help support and to honor the federal trust relationship, right? NCI is leading work with organizations like the United South and Eastern Tribes and others around trust modernization. What does the federal trust relationship look like when tribes get stronger and start enacting sovereignty in that concept? And how do we get our states to be less of barriers, right? The federal trust is the tribe to federal government relationship, but we've increasingly found that that tribe to state relationship is critical for ensuring that sovereignty can be enacted in a good way, and the county and city relationships as well. So the more that we're doing this work to look at Native to Native comparisons, we're being able to say to state governors, hey, Washington State, you're really not keeping pace with what's going on in Oregon in relation to American Indians, Alaskan Age. You guys got some similar environments, some similar resources. You need to do better. We can push the states in certain ways and, again, shine the light more on what the state systems need to be doing, and ultimately focus on process, the process of being in right relationship instead of only infrastructure. And that's really where I want to end by talking a little bit about governance. What we found in some of our work that Emily and I had worked on over a couple of years and we've tried to carry forward is that a lot of times people think that research governance is that one moment of securing IRB approval, right? Okay, I got to put my IRB application in. I got to make sure that I'm doing all the right things. I got my consent form. Okay, good. Check. I got my IRB approval. I might have to go to tribal council and get their, IRB approval there. But governance is this one moment. And what happens, and the problem with that, and it's a moment of regulation as well that I want to emphasize. And this is the real challenge in how our governance and our ethical systems are kind of set up in this country. If you know anything about research ethics, a lot of times the courses will start by, again, giving you this history of violation. And what's interesting about this history of violation is they're violations against groups of people, against populations, pregnant women, African American men in Tuskegee, Jewish people. They are violations against people as members of defined groups. And yet our ethical system in research is about protections for individuals, right? Thinking about these principles of justice and beneficence, respect for persons, are really about individual. We've missed something here. And I think that, again, it's a focus on fear over thinking about how we build ethics. And this is what we hear from our tribes. This is not coming from me. This is what we hear from the tribes that we work with. What if we started an ethical paradigm that wasn't just about preventing violation, Malia? What would that look like? Could we do that? Absolutely, you can do that. You can choose to start from your values and a different starting point that would incorporate both protection of your people and benefits of research at the outset, at the outcome of some of that. And so in our work on governance, we've looked at this fact that a lot of times, if you're looking at it as that one moment, it is this challenge of seeing a burden on researchers, right? To go through endless numbers of research review and regulatory processes, that the way that that's been storied is that it then prevents research and innovation from happening, right? People don't want to work with tribes because that's a lot of work, and the tribal leadership turns over, and then you don't know. We understand these are realities, but what we suggest is you have to come at it from a different lens. And so we've come up with this kind of framing. Again, I have to use alliteration to keep everything straight in my head. Gatekeepers, gateways, and guides. And a lot of times the research, tribal research regulation, the RRBs, the IRBs, the CABs, are seen as gatekeepers, keeping researchers out, right? Preventing research. Or they are the gateways to gaining access to tribal participants, right? These are the common ways that they're framed. What we found in some of our work is that when researchers and communities partner in effective ways and see governance as an exercise not of regulation, but of stewardship. Think about how tribal leaders and participants on IRBs and RRBs come to the work. That's a heavy responsibility, right? To make a decision to let somebody into your community, to think about what that looks like, and to try to produce the best outcomes. It's not about saying, I've got the power, I've got the authority to keep you out or to let you in. It's about saying, if I do let you in, what are you going to do? What is the impact? Are you going to help us? Are you going to be a partner in this? That's about stewardship. That's about a care and a love and a responsibility for your people and for a belief in research as a possible lever towards better outcomes at that level. So we try to shift this conversation from research regulation and governance as this one moment and this gatekeeping mechanism to one of thinking about guides. How do we effectively, as tribal partners, guide our research partners, develop our own researchers as well through that process in that context? It's about approaching the work in a different way. It's not about just the IRB approval. It's broader than that. And so ultimately, I want to kind of close here by saying that I think we have a moment. There are really great opportunities right now with the NIH, with some federal partners. The Tribal Consultation Advisory Committee has just been formed. HRAC is there, the Secretary's Tribal Advisory Council. There is a focus on culture and how it matters. A big report was just released a couple of months ago on how to operationalize culture in different ways. So there's some conversation and a moment here that we can, I think, really capitalize on having somebody like Dr. Dottie here with us today. I have never seen a project scientist disengaged with a project, Dr. Dottie. I just want to acknowledge you in this space because I think that that's partnership. You're here, you're engaged, you're thinking with us about that. So my question to you as I close, you know, fear is always going to be here. It is always asking for us to choose that. What will we choose? What is our vision? What is our hope going forward for research, for our communities, and for health? What will you choose? Will you choose love? Is there another choice? So I want to thank you, CRCAIH Shinak, as we say at home, and we look forward to talking story with you about this proposal and about how we can do more at NCI to help tell your story and to engage the process of, support the process of healing and the choice of love in this region. So, Koyan.